Tier list. Now that I've gotten your attention, allow me to introduce and briefly break down all of the viable options for the current meta showdown. Starting with the best ones, but going quite far down the totem pole, so most players who at least have the ability to level ships to 125 relatively quickly should be able to throw something together before the end of the cycle. In a more generalized tier list, how much one values damage output versus tankiness, strong specialization versus being useful in more places, and how much certain types of content is weighed compared to others can be subjective. But for a tier list that is centered around a single fight, we can set some more objective standards like which ship can actually survive, how much damage is enough damage, and which damage types are valued more because we have a fixed ammo type. The boss herself is fairly straightforward, sporting a relatively large HP pool of 1.6 million and typical evasion stats of a meta boss by recent standards, but otherwise no unique damage reduction mechanics to reduce her damage taken. Of course, she has light armor, so all the equipment that are good against light armor will be good here. If you don't know what that means, make sure to check out the equipment guide playlist in the description. Okay, let's get into the tier list. With the tools we have currently, taking down the boss in one attempt is not as difficult as the previous few iterations. The only obstacle of note is the insane amount of vanguard pressure from the boss, who on top of regular damage output, also has an attack that deals % max HP damage, meaning it doesn't matter how much your HP vanguard has, they won't be able to survive consistently unless they are invulnerable to damage. And that is why Eldritch is the only core ship in this fight. Without Eldritch, I don't really know what you can do, but with her, you have a huge pool of ships you can choose from for the rest of your fleet. Apart from Eldritch, there are no other irreplaceable ships, and thus we're onto the S tier. These are the pool of ships that are almost certainly going to be found in the other 5 slots along with Eldritch in all of the most consistent fleets. I would be truly surprised if once players have settled on a best fleet, it features a ship that isn't in this pool, considering the selection here isn't particularly narrow. I'll start with the main fleet ships. In this row, the ships that are more to the left are better than the ships to the right. Lion and Alsace are in the first 2 slots because they output the most damage and, despite being battleships, they can hold up to 2 salvos, so their cooldowns are never pushed back by firing too close to other battleships, unlike all of the other battleships. I think we are all aware by now that Lion outputs more damage than Alsace, and her damage buff is also unconditionally permanent, whereas Alsace ideally needs to fire first in the main fleet or have a French vanguard to make hers permanent. From the fleets I've tried so far, I'd say that any fleet that doesn't have Lion would see an improvement by replacing pretty much any of its main fleet ships with Lion, and likewise for Alsace, unless you're replacing Lion with Alsace, in which case it would probably be a slight downgrade. Next up is Fritz Rume, who can get off 4 airstrikes with 2 of the HE rocket fighters and has no conditional abilities, so she's just able to contribute a significant amount of damage while not overlapping with the cooldowns of your battleships. Her slight shortcoming is that she isn't the highest total contributor of damage, but her ease of use and flexibility puts her here. Also, having a carrier to wipe the bullets off the screen with their airstrike has anecdotally helped the survivability of the Vanguard. There are also a couple of other trade-offs when considering Rume that I didn't take into consideration for her placement. You do need to have the HE rocket fighters, which are a little dubious of an investment now with the priority of LA9s, and you also need over 40 carrier reload to get off 4 strikes, whereas you only need like 18 reload for battleships. Next up is Bismarck Sway, who doesn't really have anything to do with Rume, but is just another big contributor of damage against light armor. There are some other okay Ironblood options that she does buff, but the buffs are negligible and don't change the tiers of those ships at all. Maybe if she had a reload buff or aviation buff, then it would be a different story. Be careful of making her main gun cooldown too close to other battleships, in particular making her fire right after another battleship, as her cooldown will get pushed back. Next up is Soyuz, who I think actually contributes more total damage than Bismarck Sway, but I just wanted to have the Ironblood ships next to each other for the vibes. She's a very good option, but does need to be first to fire to apply her iceberg debuff, which could lead to the stacking of too many cooldowns too close to each other, as her reload is not particularly high, so be careful of that. Next up are Kearsarge and Yorktown 2, who do have something to do with each other. If you're going to run just one, Kearsarge is better, but you would ideally want to run both of them together, and then just put one of the other 4 ships in front of them in that last slot. The main advantage of this duo is that you can opt for a double Sky Raider loadout on Yorktown 2, being able to settle for 3 strikes, and then you don't need carrier reload at all. In fact, you might want to reduce your carrier reload if it's a bit on the high side to make your sync better with Kearsarge. The only weakness with this duo is that you're not running Alsace and Line, so the damage will be lower, and that's about it. The last ship in S is Vanguard. She's obviously not as good as Line and Alsace, which is why she's at the very end of the tier. However, Vanguard is valuable for the simple fact that she can do her job perfectly fine with your leftover equipment. If you only have 1+13 HE Rainbow Gun, for example, you would probably want to give it to your Line, and if you have 2, which is quite a bit of investment for just one ammo type, then it would probably be Line and Alsace. Then, if you want to use a higher damaging battleship in that last slot, for example Bismarck Sway, there will probably be stuck with a +10 gun, and depending on your progression, it could even be a 406 Mark 6, which would handicap their damage by quite a lot. And this is not an issue that plagues Vanguard, whose contribution stems heavily from her buffs. That is not to say that Vanguard is significantly worse if you have 3+13 Rainbow Guns. Her contribution still keeps up with the likes of Bismarck Sway and Soyuz, even if you have 3+13 guns. But she definitely gets bonus points for players who don't necessarily have everything maxed out just yet. Another thing about Vanguard is that the stronger your Vanguard ships are, the more valuable her fleet-wide debuff is. So if you're using something like St. Louis and Chapayev with Eldridge, she'll be more valuable than if you were using Aurora and Helena, for example. Alright, for the S-tier Vanguards, unlike the main fleet S-tier ships, I've sorted them from left to right solely based on their damage contribution. So this doesn't mean that Aurora is better than Z52 as an option, but that she contributes much more damage than Z52. Aurora has the strongest debuff, so she typically results in the biggest damage increase. Chapayev's debuff has the same strength as Trafalgar, but it's unconditional and permanent, and her personal damage is also higher, while additionally buffing your Vanguard damage, so she contributes the second most. Trafalgar's debuff is still extremely strong, especially if you're running Line plus potentially another HMS battleship, and also Plymouth, all of these ships taking advantage of Trafalgar's faction buff. But she has quite a bit of competition against light armor and stands out more against medium and heavy armor enemies. Still, despite not contributing as much damage as the other two, Trafalgar has a much easier time lasting until the end, which produces more consistent results. As for Plymouth and Z52, Plymouth contributes more damage if you have a powerful flagship, but Z52 is a more reliable tank. They both contribute quite a lot less damage than the evasion rate debuffers though. That's pretty much all there is to say. Now, in the A tier, these ships are a tangible step down from the S tier ships, but it's not that difficult to make them work. Raffaello heals, which is definitely helpful in this fight, and also slightly increases the damage of your entire fleet, making her a solid option despite the low personal damage. The reason she's an A is because I haven't used her enough to know if she's really as good as the S tier options, but my feelings as of now is that she's not. I just recently featured Warspite and New Jersey in the video released before, and here is also UVH in action in a mostly Ironblood fleet. While UVH is being buffed by Bismarck, it's not a big enough buff that you could say she's an S tier if sortied with Bismarck or anything like that. Something that's kind of neat, I guess, is that she makes Z52's 5% damage debuff permanent because her main gun cooldown is less than 10 seconds. But even with that factored in, she's still a bit of a downgrade from the S tier ships. And don't get it twisted, if you replace any of the 3 main fleet ships with Line or Alsace, it would make this fleet better. And yes, that even includes Bismarck. And then for the A tier vanguards, the first 4 are all selfish damage ships that deal a lot of damage if you have their equipment at plus 13, but can't tank and don't contribute as much as the evasion debuffers. Next, Mogador deals slightly less damage but can tank with the help of Eldritch and also make Alsace's debuff permanent, so that you don't have to worry about having her fire first before other ships, and the same goes for St. Louis, of course. Helena is good for anyone who can almost kill the boss, maybe averaging like 1.4 to 1.5 million damage, and then bringing her might drop your average down, but will also increase the likelihood of one-shotting the boss quite significantly. Now we get into the B tier, which consists of substitutions if you're missing ships from the upper tiers. For players who have a lot of fully enhanced equipment and a lot of fleet tech as well, it's quite possible to one-shot the boss even using a couple of these in your fleet, and you can consider them for some variety in your gameplay. If your account is not super developed, then using mostly ships from the higher tier will be essential. Dyson just deals a lot of damage and that's about it. If you don't have any URs at all, then Dyson will easily be the strongest gold battleship and gold ship in general to dish out damage in this fight. She's not exactly easy to get though, since she's from the newest season of research, and she doesn't have any catch-up blueprints yet. And I actually ranked FTG below Dyson, which might seem weird, but because her alternating reload buff makes her a little annoying to sync with your other ships, and also the fact that Kawakaze never does damage to the main fleet, makes FTG unable to reach her full damage potential. Next is Richelieu, who has a lot of potential because of all the French ships that are actually good. Her buffs are really strong, and she has no wasted buffs like anti-air or aviation. Duke of York is the gold version of Vanguard, where you don't really need to give her any fancy equipment, and her contribution is higher the stronger your other ships are. Her reload is quite low though, so I would pretty much only recommend her to players who don't have the fleet tech to get 4 salvos off, as her timings match up better with 3 salvo setups. If you're just going for 3 salvos, you can give her a high performance fire control radar, and your other battleships just a pair of shells. That way she can apply her debuff for your other ships. If this wasn't a light armor enemy, she would be ranked a little bit higher because she would be able to use the 457 for a 4 salvo composition, but there isn't an equivalent option for HE guns. Next are Nakhimov and Implacable. Not only do their roots not help a lot when you already have Eldritch in your fleet guaranteed, but on top of that, their reload is also a bit too low to get 4 strikes off with the HE rocket planes. Still, they can equip 2 of those, or Sky Raider if you want to offer 3 strikes instead, so while they're nowhere near the dominance they have been in fights against the other armor types, they're still not deadweights or anything like that. The final ship in the B tier for main fleet is Enterprise. She's strong when she procs, and the USS trio with Kearsarge and Yorktown still works, but the success rate is not high, hence she finds herself here. Small unfortunate events such as Yorktown and Kearsarge's damage buffs for Enterprise being additive with Lucky E, Kearsarge having to use an autoloader to get 4 salvos with the 406 Mark 7, and also not being able to use the stronger Lion Gun because it's not USS, have caused this fleet to fall behind slightly. Also, if you're going to roll the Enterprise Loto anyway, I recommend bringing Helena too. Now we get into the B tier Vanguard ships. Napoli and Yatsen are probably your best bets if you don't have Eldritch, so I put them there. No guarantees though. The other 3 are just good damage dealers, but not as good as the A tier ones obviously. Now, I have this extra tier called Needs Babysitting, which are ships in the above tiers that cannot be in the main tank slot. So you'll likely only be able to bring 1 of these unless you risk main tanking with Eldritch, which doesn't seem as reliable as tanking with another ship like Z52 and then using Eldritch more as a buffer. Ships like Z52 and Mogador who are not in this tier can be the main tank with Eldritch's support. They won't make it until the end guaranteed, but they should be able to last for a very long time, after which Eldritch herself should be able to last the rest of the way. So I would recommend running something like Z52 as tank, Eldritch in the middle to tank after Z52 dies, potentially, and then Aurora in the rear to be protected, or some variation of that. In the bonus maybe tier are A few tanks that you could try if you don't have Eldritch, but probably aren't as good as Napoli or Yatsen. Ships that do a good amount of damage against light armor. And other potential niche ships that could contribute something while being carried to glory by the broken S-tier ships. Also, Janus and Lungmu at the end because they're cute. I think for the most part, running ships in the maybe tier will give you better results than running ships that aren't on the tier list at all, but don't expect to be one-shotting the boss with these. For example, any of these heavy cruisers like San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and Northampton are probably better than Rune or Drake. Of these ships, I've only tried L'Audacieux, who ended up working in a mostly French fleet. Some of them definitely have more potential than others. For example, I would say there's a good chance you can make a fleet that works with Centaur and a bunch of S-tier ships, but it won't be the best. Alright, that is pretty much it for this tier list. I hope that was informative. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.